Today I'm going to be teaching you guys how to make a basic rain system in Maya using the built-in special effects menus. Before we jump into that, we're going to want to set up a couple things first. Firstly, you want to come down to your timeline here, and about 200 frames should be good to set up. But right-click on your timeline, and you go to where it says playback speed. Now by default, the playback speed is probably in real time. What we want is play every frame, max real time. This way, when we make the actual generation, when we hit play on the timeline, it will actually show us in real time. Next, we're going to want to switch from the modeling setup. We're going to want to go down to the FX setup. And this gives us access in the top shelf to the FX systems. The specific system that we want is over here to the left, and it's called nParticles. Now when we click on this, we'll get a drop down and we'll see all these options. What we're going to be playing around with today is the emitter. So we want to come over to create emitter and hit on the option box here. Once you do that, a new window will be created. And going down the line here, we're going to be doing a rain system. So I named my emitter rain. Solvers, if you already have a system within the field, say cloth or something like that, there'd already be a solver there. But for this example, since we're starting fresh, create a new solver. We have three different types of emitter types. There's omni, which means that the emitter will emit in all directions evenly. There's directional, which if we were making a hose or like an exhaust, it shoots out in one direction. And then there's what we will be using today is the volume. So click on the volume, rate particles per second. That's just how powerful it's going to be. So we're put it at about 800 because we're making like a downpour. The rest of this we could leave at default. The other thing that's worth going over is volume emitter attributes. This says, since we're using a volume, it's basically making a cube as it says here, and everything will be produced within the cube. You can change this to be a sphere, a cylinder, cone, or torus, but we're going to be doing a cube. And we're going to keep these at default. After you are done messing around with these, just hit create. After hitting create, you'll notice that it plopped down this big green square in the center, and over on the outlier, it created three new nodes. Those nodes are rain2, which are our emitter proper, nParticle 1, which is the particles that will be emitted from the emitter, and nucleus. To begin, let's look at nucleus. The nucleus works as your gravity and wind. It is what ties everything down within the scene. So, if we go over to the attribute editor, we can see that there's transform attributes. This, you can change the scale and rotation and stuff, but it doesn't really matter. So it's best to keep this at the center, at the origin point 0, 0. Now gravity and wind. 9.8 is the standard, like, real world gravity. And we're going to keep this as is for now. And gravity direction is at -1. These go X, Y, Z. So whenever you see three boxes next to each other, they're always in the X first, Y next, and Z. So right now it's going -1, Y. So the gravity is currently pulling things down. Air density is how dense the air. Raising air density will slow things down. They'll have to go through more. Wind speed, if we wanted to add wind, and this is how fast the wind blows, and wind direction again, X, Y, and Z. It's currently blowing towards positive X, so this is towards the right of the screen. Ground plane, we can set up an invisible ground plane that you can see right there. And this is for collision purposes. We're going to leave that off for now. Alright. Now we're going to hop over to rain2, or our emitter. What I'm going to want to do first is I'm going to change the scale here. I'm going to press R to bring up the scale tool, and just bring it on up, and W for the move select tool, and drag it up. While keeping it selected, we're going to go to the attribute editor again, and then here we have, same as the nucleus, transform attributes, which is the scale, rotation, shear, stuff like that. You can do toggle these by hand if you wanted. If you wanted like an exact size, you can do that here. Basic emitter attributes, these the same options that we had before when we created the emitter. Distance direction attributes. So if we go down here to our timeline and we press play, we can see it creates. Now an important thing here is that whenever we stop it, we don't want to drag to the beginning. We always want to go down to the bottom right here and hit the to first frame. If you drag, it can mess up the emission properties and some of the generation, so it's just a good rule of thumb to, whenever you stop, just hit the to first frame here. So again, have it playing, we stop it, and then we jump to the first. We're going to scroll on past distance and direction attributes and go to basic emission speed attributes. Now speed is currently set at 1, and this randomizes the speed by 1. As you can see, some of them fall a little bit slower than the others. But the best way whenever working with emission types or the effects is to really crank it up, and this shows you. So we're going to put it up to something like 6. And this is speed randomization. So some will fall anywhere between 1 and 6. And as you can see, it's a bit more hectic. It's all over the place. To really prove our point, 60. And as you can see, it's crazy. So for now, we're going to put this to something moderate, like around 4. And this gives it like a little bit of a wiggle as it produces. Again, we can change the shape of the emitter. We're going to keep it as cube. And volume speed attributes. Now, this along with the speed emission from before, we can say how fast we want them to go away from the center. So right now it's at 1. Decent rain. I'm going to put it at something like 14. And now, as you can see, it shoots out in just away from the center. And this would be good for something, say, like a lawn hose. Something where you need it to really cover some ground. So we're going to reset it, and then we have a long axis and a round axis. I'm going to put that back to 1. A long axis, as you're about to see, is right now it's at 0, so everything falls just kind of normally downward. If we do a long axis and we do something crazy like 60, axis is the y, so it's always up down. That's a good example of that. See how I typed in 60 but nothing happened? After you type something in, you always have to hit enter. And then 60 along the axis, it's going up at a speed of 60. If we wanted to go in the opposite direction, negative 60, we'll have it really spray down at a negative 60. You can do some fun stuff with this, combined with the around axis, which makes it go in a circular motion like that. So it's got a slight turn to it. Now it gets emitted in like a spinning fashion, so it creates this cone. So let's stop that, turn that back to 1, or 0. Now random direction, random speed, it's what it does on the tin. It does what it says. It's like 5. Speed, do like 10. And now they just move wherever they want. Alright, at this point we're going to switch over to end particle 1, which are the particles emitted by our emitter. And we're going to get a bunch of option boxes here. First with count, can't really change the count, that's determined by the emitter. Next is lifespan. Now, if we watch here, once the particles are made, they will fall forever, and they stay on screen forever. So if you have these falling into like a bowl or something, they'll stay. But that's not really how rain works. So we're going to go back, and we're going to change from live forever to random range. Constant, they'll just live constantly, and lifespan PP only doesn't really work. It requires some coding to get working, so we're just going to skip that and go to random range. lifespan. It has a lifespan of 1. And at default, this should be 0. But for us, we're going to put it at about 3. So now when I play it, you can see that after a point, they disappear. And if you look closely, you can see that they're disappearing before they hit that bottom out point. So we're going to go back, close lifespan. Particle size and collisions, both of these have to do with the collision property. We're going to be avoiding those for now. And we're going to go to dynamic properties. This is where most of the meat is. And dynamic properties are fun because as we have no wind in the nucleus, we only have gravity right now. We can tell the particles to ignore wind and gravity, but we're not. So we have local force, and this works as local gravity, which works outside of the nucleus, and local wind. So if we play right now, they're all falling at -1y with no wind. But let's change that. Let's say the wind is going like 20x, 0y, and like 40z. And now you can see they're blowing to the side direction even though there's no wind on the nucleus. This is good when you have multiple systems in place and you want to have like a local effect on each of them. You don't have to change your entire scene. You can do it within the particle system itself. Change these back to 0. And then you also have drag, how long it takes them to go, and mass, how heavy they are. So right now I had a mass of 1, pretty decent. But if you crank this up, they will fall much faster. So we do want wind in our scene. Let's do this like 10, and this like -15. Now the numbers I'm using are completely arbitrary. They don't really matter. You can use whatever you want, but like I said earlier, to really get a feel of what these boxes do, it's just good to crank them and see like what happens. And for this wind, that's a little bit too weak. So we want probably more on the X. Let's go like 40. There we go. That's a bit better. Mass scale, we're going to avoid that. Force field generation, along with the nucleus and the particles themselves, you can create a force field which moves stuff around. We're not going to mess with that. So we're going to close dynamic properties and come down here to shading. Shading is also important because this changes everything about the particles themselves. So right now we have dots and they kind of look like snow. If you don't like the dots or the points, we can change it to multi-point, multi-streak, numeric, which is kind of weird, spheres, sprites. If you want custom sprites on image planes, you can import those. That's pretty cool. But for this one, we're going to use streaks. Now, as you can see, it changed in real time, and the streaks look more like rain. Now, it's worth mentioning that not all of these work depending on the render that you're using. So we're going to go streaks, and if you come up here to the render settings, or the render view, nothing comes up. Switch to Maya hardware, you can see it. So some of these don't work in Maya software, but they'll work in Maya hardware, and I believe they all work in Arnold. So going back here, we're going to just click on these streaks. Right now, I think it looks pretty good, but we can also change these attributes. We can do line width, make them fatter, 6. Now they're huge, more stylized. It kind of looks like paper. And then tail fade and tail size. So let's let this run a little bit. Say outrageous tail length, 6. Super long streaks. This seems like a downpour. And like I said, it's just fun to play around with it. So like streams of paper just coming out. But we're gonna keep the line width at 1. Tail size we'll do like 2.5. That looks pretty good. Use lighting. If we had lights in the scenes, they would generate shadows. This gets a bit heavy on your render times, but it's pretty cool. Opacity, how transparent they are. You can also change opacity on this opacity scale. So depending on position linearly in the X, Y, or just Y, I should say, you can tell it to become more or less transparent. You can also change it to be smooth or spline, and that changes this curve here. So let's see if we can see it real time. Set. It's kind of hard to notice. This is best seen when you're using like objects. So I'm going to set this, reset this, get rid of these. Color, you can change color same way you did before. We can do selected color and say we want it to be like more blue. Now the rain's blue. You can also change, you can put a color gradient. So let's go here, and I want it as it to fall to change to, say, like a purple. And I got this window by hitting this arrow button over here next to the color. So it creates the gradient map. So now, when we play it, it starts off pink for like a split second, and then it goes blue. It happens really quickly. We're going to get rid of these and reset it back to white. Scrolling down, incandescence if you wanted to play around with the particles themselves giving off light. And per particle array attributes. This is best done with the code that you can create within Maya, so we're going to avoid that. And we've pretty much gone over all of the really important pieces, so all that's left now is to play around and get a rain system that you would like. The one we have right now it's alright. It's not amazing, but I'm going to play around, toggle some stuff, and come back. So let's keep it with the streak threshold, that's fine. Let's play with the line width a little bit. 1.5, make them a little bit thicker. Directed to tail fade, tail size, let's do that to 3. Make them really come down fast. Now the size might be a bit much, so we'll just put it back to 1. Let's go back to our emitter. And within the emitter, I want to scroll back up to the volume speed attributes. So along the axis and around the axis, I kind of liked how the around axis looked. So we're going to do a 0.5 on that one. Now it comes out kind of sprayed. And let's do a long axis. We'll do like a -2 on this one. Now it's really falling with some force. Within the particles themselves, we're jumping back here. I want to go to the dynamic properties, and I kind of don't like how far to the right it goes, so we're just going to change this to 20. Change it back. That's falling at a bit more of a reasonable pace. On top of that, I'm actually going to change the volume itself by making it flatter. You can also concentrate the stream by how wide it is. So now since there's a lot less space, it comes out with a lot more force. You can make it a bit bigger while it's still flat, so it covers a wider area. And now we're going to play with some of the stuff in the nucleus. The speed's pretty decent, but I kind of want it to be a bit higher. So we're just going to crank gravity up. Try 26. And now it's really coming down. Like, this looks like some painful rain. You could also change the gravity direction. So what if instead of coming down, it pushes up? It's a pretty cool effect. Like if you wanted to have it raining so hard that the rain was coming off of the ground, you could have one emitter going down and a second emitter emitting upwards. But I'll just keep it at -1. Let's add some wind noise at about 5. Wind direction, X, Y, Z. Remember, we're going to have it come into the Z, so forward, back. Put this at like 14. See how that looks. And I think that looks pretty good. So yeah, that was one of the many ways to use particles and emission systems. You could also, if you wanted, paint particles onto things. There's a lot you can do. So I would really recommend going around and playing around with these particle systems because it's a lot of fun. But yeah.